Welcome to the second edition of Tucker Carlson Tonight, the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Well, Donald Trump won the election a week ago tonight, but a growing number of his opponents insist it's not over. Across social media this week, and particularly on Facebook, there are suggestions that in the next few months, the results of this election could be undone by some technical means, giving the presidency to somebody else come January. Preposterous, you say? A THC-infused fever dream of the wacko Bernie left? One of the many things your kids' teachers have been telling them lately that isn't quite true? Not entirely, actually.
I'm sorry, Hillary. You were robbed.
She's only president because of a stupid idea from the 1700s that was meant to appease people in the rural South and these slave states.
Hopefully that the Electoral College will hear us and go with the popular vote, which Hillary clearly won.
A true democracy is who wins the popular vote.
Hillary got the most votes. Democracy, one person, one vote must stand. The Electoral College must end.
I'm protesting the Electoral College because Donald Trump did not have the popular vote.
The majority of Americans wanted Hillary Clinton, not Donald Trump. More people wanted her than him.
He may have gotten the electorals, but she still had the popular vote, and we the people don't have a voice.
So not everybody thinks the results are legitimate, and among those who still believe that Trump could lose this election are some electors. Those are the Americans charged with choosing our next president in the Electoral College. We're going to talk to at least one of them tomorrow, I think. But others are demanding the Electoral College itself be abolished. Is that possible, even, and is it a good idea? Joining us now is Dr. John Gilmore. He's thought about this a lot. He's a professor of government and public policy at the College of William and Mary in Virginia. Professor, it's great to see you tonight.
It's good to be here.
So first to the rumors that are floating around on social media, and they're ubiquitous. I got a note from one of my children about them last night. Is it possible at this late date for the Electoral College to somehow take the presidency away from Trump?
Well, it's possible in a technical sense, in that the electors are mostly free to vote for anybody they want to once they get to cast their vote as an elector. But they won't do that because the Republican electors who are supporting Trump are Republican donors, they're activists, they're people who have spent years working for the Republican cause. So for them to get there to the Electoral College and cast their vote for Hillary Clinton or somebody else is just about inconceivable. Then in some states it's actually illegal, where they're actually required by state law.
So it's not going to happen. I wonder, though, just as an American, what do you think the message of people talking about that possibility is to the people who voted for Trump?
Well, I think those people are just really disappointed, and this is their way of working through disappointment.
But in so doing, aren't they also sending a really clear message? We don't care about you, your issues, the election results. We're willing to subvert democracy because we don't like the result?
They are. I don't know if they're subverting democracy, but they're definitely disappointed. I think they would be happy to undermine the legitimacy of Trump's election.
Yes.
Maybe that's what they're trying to do, and say if he is sworn in as president, he's not really a legitimate president.
So you say that the Electoral College itself ought to be abolished. Why?
Well, there are two main problems with it. One of them is that you get the situation like this, where one candidate wins the popular vote.
Right.
And it looks like Hillary Clinton is likely to win with a margin of about 1.5 million votes, a lot more than Al Gore got in 2000. But Donald Trump has a substantial lead in the Electoral College vote, and that's just difficult to explain. It's difficult to explain to people why the candidate who won the popular vote isn't going to be the president.
Well, because it's happened pretty recently, 16 years ago, we're all kind of familiar with this, and we knew that going in, correct?
That's right. And there's a second reason why the Electoral College isn't good. There are actually a number of them, but the second most important one, I think, is that it means that candidates aren't competing for much of the country. So states like California, Texas, Illinois, New York, New Jersey are completely off limits for the candidates. At one point, Trump went and staged some campaign events in Mississippi and Texas, and people were making fun of him for doing that because everybody knew that he was going to win those states. Why campaign there? So I think it would be much better to have a system.
But isn't the opposite true? I mean, if the popular vote were all that mattered, then the population centers would be the only places that anyone campaigned or paid attention to. And yet, our cities are the places where all the jobs are, all the money is, all the prosperity is, and the rest of the country has nothing, and you're suggesting taking the one thing they have left, which is political power, away from them.
Well, actually, candidates already campaign in plenty of places that aren't big cities.
Because they have to, because the Electoral College.
Yeah. So I don't think it would make that big a difference in where they campaign.
But if you took that away, why would I ever leave Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles, ever?
Because there are plenty of votes in Dallas and Houston as well. And in Midland, Texas as well. There are votes all over the place.
But they're also, there's a big country out there between Georgetown and Malibu, that great dark space we never visit from Washington. I mean, all of those people would be ignored, no?
Well, they wouldn't be ignored, but more attention would be focused on cities, but that's where people are. And I think it's important for candidates to campaign in front of people. Everybody's vote counts. And under the current way we elect presidents, a lot of people practically don't exist for the election. Huge states that we know are going to go for one party or the other are completely ignored by the candidates. And I think that's unfortunate.
So you're saying that, like, sophisticated, affluent coastal culture doesn't get enough attention in our society? Is that what you're saying?
Not in the election.
Not in the election, okay. So, but we're just not paying enough attention to Barbara Streisand and her friends?
She gets plenty of attention.
She gets plenty. Well, on that we agree. Professor, it's great to see you tonight. Thanks a lot for coming.
You're welcome.
And here's something new. More than 70% of anti-Trump protesters arrested in Portland, Oregon last week did not vote in the state of Oregon. KGTV dug into state election records, and good for them, and found that at least 79 of the 112 people taken into custody during those demonstrations were either not registered to vote in Oregon or did not cast a ballot there in the 2016 election. The Portland protests spanned 5 nights and devolved into violent riots that caused more than $1 million worth of property damage and scared the hell out of everybody. Well, here now with his thoughts on that is Fox News roaming correspondent, a man who has roamed far and wide across the fruited plain, our friend Geraldo Rivera. So, Geraldo, are you I got to say, I'm probably less appalled by this in New York because I think you've got a right to protest even if you don't vote, but you disagree.
Well, first of all, I hope that our interview goes as smooth as your interview with Dr. Emanuel that preceded this.
You can't blame the Republicans for a law they didn't have anything to do with. I'm sorry.
True.
I'm sorry.
And I also have to say congratulations on the big hit show here, and I love your confirmation haircut. You know, it's really working for you.
That's me, but I appreciate it.
Listen, I don't, like you, I believe that I have nothing against protests per se unless you inconvenience innocent people grievously or break other people's stuff. I was a renowned or notorious protester, however you want to characterize it, 1968, 1969, 1970, civil rights, anti-war. So there is a perfectly American tradition of nonviolent protest. What happened in Oregon, though, was despicable. It was thuggery. It was people who not only didn't vote, some of them probably voted for Jill Stein or Gary Johnson just as bad or almost as bad. Not only that, they were, ironically, the bitter irony, they were breaking stuff in a city and in a state that went overwhelmingly for Hillary Clinton and against Donald Trump. So they had no logic to what they did. I think there are protesters with a specific beef in this country, Tucker, and you and I could have this discussion anytime you want. I think that these DREAM Act students who now are threatened with deportation, even after President Obama gave them a deferral from deportation, I think that those kids have a right to protest because they are living in abject terror now that their lives are going to be disrupted. But protesters who don't vote or
I mean,
break
just to be totally clear, you'll concede that the president's order was illegal, A, and B, they're not citizens. So it's a little weird. Like if I showed up and pick a country in Latin America and said, I'm staying here and I'm going to take taxpayer-subsidized services, and if you don't like it, I'm going to throw a rock through the window of Starbucks. People would say that's kind of unreasonable, actually, because you're not really supposed to be here
I
in the first place.
have seen no ruling that the initial 700,000 young people who were brought here as children by their parents through no fault of their own and have lived law-abiding lives here in the United States. I've seen no ruling that that was either unconstitutional or illegal. There is a stay on the expansion of the program to their parents by one federal court judge in Texas that has been affirmed by the United States Supreme Court, but it has to be litigated. But what about these kids, though? Think humanistically about these children now.
Well, I feel for every one of them.
They're going back to a country they've never seen, at least in their conscious memory.
I get it, but here's my macro problem with this. The real concern of American politicians ought to be American citizens. That's who they're elected to watch out for. And yet on the left, their main concern seems to be people who are not here legally. So it's like, where are your sympathies? I mean, there are American citizens whose lives are affected negatively by the presence of people here illegally. It doesn't mean the people here illegally are bad people, but it means your #1 priority is looking out for your people, American citizens.
Again,
and on the left, they don't care.
I reject your contention that they impact the lives of citizens negatively. That's not the way I see it. The vast majority of the people who voted for Donald Trump live in areas where undocumented immigrants do not reside. Most of them have never had any kind of interaction with an undocumented
but Geraldo,
immigrant, and certainly not these children. These are
let's
students,
be reasonable.
by and
I'm not
large.
against the children, and I feel
These
for
are
them,
American
actually.
kids in every way, shape, or form, Tucker.
But let's be
except
totally
the
real.
fact of the accident of their birth.
If all of a sudden your kid's school finds itself flooded with people who don't speak the language, doesn't mean they're bad people. They can be great people. They probably are great people. But it's a massive drain on resources, and all of a sudden they're canceling gym and music, and your kid's experience becomes less good necessarily because there's a limited pool of resources. So, to say that there's no consequence of this is just wrong. It's silly.
This is the town I was born in. I was born on this island, Manhattan Island. There are 500,000 undocumented immigrants in the 5 boroughs of the city. You never hear about them. You never hear about them. Why? Because they don't commit these flamboyant crimes. They are people that mind their business. They work hard. They deliver pizza at 2 o'clock in the morning on a February, when the wind blowing up your pants. I mean, I think that you have to have a balanced. I like Donald Trump. I've known him forever. I wish him every success in the world. But I think now is the time for him to reassure people these aren't the people that he's talking about when he's building his wall or he has his deportation force.
Okay,
these are kids.
But what about, why do you think that Trump got the overwhelming majority of working class voters? Because they're the ones whose lives are affected by the presence
people
of
gin up the fears.
Immigration.
People like Stephen King in Iowa, starting right at the get-go of the presidential race, they make these people into boogeymen that the voter can put all their fears and all their loathing on these people as skinsters.
I'm sorry. I'm calling PC on you. No more boogeymen, boogie people. We're out of time, unfortunately. It's great to see you. Roman, Geraldo.
Good luck, man. Good luck.
Thanks.
I'm a big
fan.
I'm back at the book segment tonight, getting young kids to read and to be polite without banishing them to the basement. New children's book called Give Please a Chance does that. It's written by mega-selling author James Patterson and me, your humble correspondent. Mr. Patterson came up with the idea, and he joins us now. Now, why did you call me up? Why did you pick me for this?
Because I know you care about kids. You write kids' books. And you have this big audience, which we're talking to right now.
Right.
And I like the idea of people getting together who don't necessarily think exactly the same way, but can agree on something, and they try to move it forward.
Right, and it didn't hurt that you and I have been very successful in a book marketing situation.
That helps.
People know right away when it's Patterson and O'Reilly on the book cover, they're going to check it out.
I would buy it.
And the reason that we're both doing this and devoting our time to it is twofold. Number one, we want kids ages 2 to 6, which is, you'd say that was a target audience, right? 2 to 6?
Yeah.
We want them to start holding books and knowing that you read, and books have pages and pictures. So pictures are fabulous. So that's number one, to get them involved with books, which is, I think, the secret to education, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I think there are two things. One, I think the parents and the grandparents and the uncles and aunts and whatever have a lot of fun reading this book, reading with the kids or reading to the kids, depending on how old the kids are. That's the one piece of it. The second thing is, and we've talked about this, the idea of hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of kids actually growing up as being please and thank you kids.
Yeah, polite kids.
And they can become, please, believe it or not, please and thank you teenagers someday.
You have to brainwash the urchins. You have to inculcate it.
Exactly right.
But it's a fun brainwashing because, again, the kids, it's kind of magical. They open the book and
waterboarding is fun. It's
right. Waterboarding with Ned. Now, it's a great Christmas thing.
It is, and it's a fun. The pictures are great. The kids will really enjoy it, and they repeat over and over. Please, please, please.
Now, were you prepared when you went out with me to do interviews for what happened at CBS this morning, which we'll show you guys in the morning and tip of the day, where when I show up, it's all politics, it's all controversy. Were you prepared for that?
No, I thought it was going to be more softballs, because I usually get softballs, and then they threw a slider. I was like, wow, a slider. That's
I told you on the phone, I don't know whether you remember this, I said, look, if you get involved with me, then you're going to bring all of this stuff, because...
No, you were very fair about it.
I'm going to try to be fair, but I'm not going to take any guff, and I'm going to defend my network, which
and you did.
But that, I think, is going to be helpful to the book, rather than a detriment. Some people say, well...
I think it's a good thing.
Because you're so controversial, or you're not controversial, you just write good books. I'm controversial. But because I draw attention to the project, so that these people who might not have heard of the children...
The thing is, we both agree this is a really good book. And honestly, even one of the things I think people ought to do with this book is give it to teachers at preschools.
Yeah,
this is a really good preschool book.
Well, I gave it to some urchins in my neighborhood. Like a test drive, and I picked the dimmest urchins, the dumbest kids, and I gave it to them, and they all loved it. And they don't just read it once; they read it like 10 times.
Well, that's what happens, and that's why this habit. That's why Bill and I both know Latin, because we went to Catholic school, but that was painful. They're going to learn to say please, and it's going to be
fun. And when I say the dumb kids, I was one of the dumb kids, so I can recognize them. And usually the dumb kids turn out to be brilliant when they get older. So, Jim, thanks for including me on this project. It's so much fun.
It's been a pleasure. Everything
and I think it's going to do very well for Christmas and Hanukkah. And, you're a master.
And tomorrow.
And tomorrow, right.
This leadership team is unified. This entire House Republican conference is unified. And we are so eager to get to work with our new president-elect to fix America's pressing problems.
It would be an honor to serve the country again, but ultimately this is the president-elect's decision. I don't think it's appropriate to talk about it in public. In God's good time, he'll make up his mind.
Well, first of all, I won't be Attorney General.
You won't be Attorney General.
So good, I won't have to decide that one, thank God.
I've made that clear.
So I can escape that one.
I should ask Jeff Sessions that question, should I?
It wouldn't be a bad idea, but I don't know who's going to be Attorney General.
The choice for Secretary of State in the Trump administration is down to Rudolph Giuliani and John Bolton.
John would be a very good choice.
Is there anybody better?
Maybe me, I don't know.
Rudy Giuliani talking to the Wall Street Journal. We're told that Rudy Giuliani could have pretty much any position he wants after being such an integral part of the Trump campaign. We will see where he ends up. He is being talked about at the State Department. A new name surfacing today for potentially at the Defense Department, and that is Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas. He is a possibility. We've also heard, as we reported here, Senator Kelly Ayotte, who just lost her Senate bid in New Hampshire. And there are listed names. This is the time when you're looking at names, and we'll see what we can nail down. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard. Julie Pace, White House correspondent for the Associated Press. Mercedes Schlapp, columnist for the Washington Times. And Jonathan Swan, national political reporter for The Hill. All right, Jonathan, it's funny to hear Giuliani talk like that. It's so candid, or not so candid. What are your thoughts on the transition and how close they are to getting these big names nailed down?
My sources say that it's unlikely there'll be announcements this week. It's not impossible. They're probably going to happen next week. But there's a few people. You said something there which is absolutely correct, which is there's a few people in Trump's orbit there that people say whatever they want, they basically get. Jeff Sessions is one of those people. It's, people have been floating different agencies like Defense, Homeland Security, and I was talking to a source today in Trump's inner circle, and they said whatever Jeff Sessions wants, Jeff Sessions will get. So I think Rudy Giuliani is a bit more complicated. There's some good names in there for Secretary of State, and one thing I reported today was that Sheldon Adelson, who's a big donor, he's been pushing very strongly for Rudy Giuliani and John Bolton. He likes both of those guys.
And I've heard Bob Corker's name, Mercedes. I've heard David Petraeus' name mentioned for state.
Well, I think what you're learning in this transition period is the fact that there's many voices involved, many influencers. There would be the Trump children, obviously Jared, the son-in-law, Bannon, Kellyanne Conway. They're all really having this impact on who will be placed in these top positions. And I think that's important to point out, because as we're finding, it's not necessarily a very clean process. It's a bit chaotic. There's a lot of strong opinions on where people should go. I think to the case of Giuliani, he has been with Trump through good, bad, ugly. And so he obviously will be favored to maybe be at the Department of State. I thought for Giuliani it would make sense for him to move on with either Department of Homeland Security or Attorney General, but obviously he put that off the table pretty quickly.
Julie.
Well, I think what you learn in transitions is that it's better to be behind the scenes than to be out front. What I think has been so unusual is how many people are out there actually talking about themselves in jobs. Normally,
it's shocking,
it's
right?
Unbelievable. Normally, if you are thought to be in the mix for a top job, you do everything you can to not be out there.
Go out of town.
You leave town. You send your wife and kids on vacation. You do not want to be in the mix. But as we know with Trump, it's a very different process. Sometimes people communicate to him through television. So for some of these people, it might not be a bad idea to be out there so much.
So it reminds us a little bit about like The Apprentice, maybe something. I don't know. But he is a businessman, and he's going to figure out who's the best position to get his ideas and campaign promises across the finish line. Chris Christie was not that person, and he was moved aside. Pence put in the transition spot, and it's being portrayed as some just normal evolution. It seems more than that, the changes that have been happening.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it was clear from the beginning, from the moment he picked Mike Pence, that if Donald Trump were elected president, he would rely heavily on Pence, both his experience in Washington, his experience as a policymaker, and I think we're seeing that right now very clearly. I mean, Mike Pence is running the process. Everybody reports to Mike Pence, and then they'll take these decisions to Donald Trump. I think it's true that there are some people who basically have their pick, but for everybody else, there's this sort of mad scramble, and it is funny to see people doing it in politicking in the open. You've had people who are politicking quietly. I mean, people who are, having their surrogates make phone calls to important people who they think can influence the decision. I mean, the poor people who are named to the executive committee and the vice chairs. Probably voicemails are all full now because everybody's lobbying to get one of these jobs. But Mike Pence is very clearly in charge.
We rarely hear from the 43rd president of the United States, but he weighed in on this election today.
People become very frustrated. They become angry. They become frustrated in their lives. And that gets reflected in the political process. And I think that's part of what was taking place during this recent election. I understand anger. And some people might have been angry when I was president. But anger shouldn't drive policy. What needs to drive policy is what's best for the people who are angry.
Another president, Jonathan, who won the Electoral College. And he obviously dealt with a situation with the Iraq War that he was facing a lot of pushback.
Yeah, and it's interesting now, you speak to people in Trump's orbit and there's almost a glee with which they have, obviously in public they're, accepting the warm words of the Bushes after the election, the Romneys, but there's a real glee that they've destroyed the Bush wing of the Republican Party. And I think foreign policy is just one of the areas that we're going to see the most interesting action in. And Steve Bannon, you should watch for him to have a big role in national security and foreign policy. Everyone just talks about him on a domestic level, but this is someone who's got very big ideas for America's role in the world.
Julie, Rand Paul was out today pushing back on John Bolton very hard, saying it doesn't fit with Donald Trump's, how he talked about foreign policy on the trail.
And I think what you learn from that, what we should take away from that, is that even though Donald Trump is going to have a Republican Senate and a Republican House, his nominations and eventually his policy positions are not going to be a cakewalk. There are still divisions within the Republican Party that were not solved by this election. And you have some folks in the party who are more isolationist. You have some who are more hawkish. And he is going to have to try to strike that balance. And I think it's going to be a real challenge for him, especially as someone who does not have a lot of experience with the workings of Congress.
I want to just quickly, Mercedes, talk about Barbara Boxer's efforts. The Electoral College. She said the Electoral College is an outdated, undemocratic system that does not reflect our modern society, and it needs to change immediately. Every American should be guaranteed that their vote counts. Uphill battle for Democrats.
Absolutely. I think that you would go to any of these smaller states who would argue against changing the Electoral College, because if not, what you would see is candidates simply campaigning in the urban big city areas in California, in Texas, where there's a lot of population. So that idea won't go nowhere.
And Donald Trump agrees with you now. Electoral College is actually genius in that it brings all states, including the smaller ones, into play. Campaigning is much different. So that's settled as far as the president-elect is concerned.
Hi, I'm Bill O'Reilly. Thanks for watching us tonight. The first challenge to President-elect Donald Trump. That is the subject of this evening's Talking Points memo. One of Mr. Trump's most vivid campaign promises was this.
We will end the sanctuary cities that have resulted in so many needless deaths. Cities that refuse to cooperate with federal authorities will not receive taxpayer dollars.
I can get more pointed than that. But now a number of mayors across the country are defying the president-elect, saying They will not stop their sanctuary policies.
To be clear about what Chicago is, it always will be a sanctuary city.
We are not going to sacrifice 500,000 people who live amongst us. We're not going to tear families apart.
I think by continuing to be a sanctuary city, we're doing the most American thing that we could possibly do.
So let's analyze what's really happening here. By refusing to obey federal immigration law, the politicians are basically saying we want open borders because anyone who gets into America illegally has a place where they can go with no repercussions. While most migrants are law-abiding people who just want to support themselves and their families, a number of them are criminals or layabouts, simply here to exploit the American system. Those people become part of the sanctuary movement as well. Now, you'll remember that the thug who allegedly murdered Kate Steinle was released by the county of San Francisco after ICE requested he be held in jail so the feds could pick him up. San Francisco let the man go, despite the fact he had 7 felony convictions in America, had been deported 5 times. Kate Steinle is dead because San Francisco refuses to obey federal law, period. There's a lawsuit, civil suit, underway in the case, and the criminal proceeding is crawling along. Now, you would think any decent politician would learn a lesson from the Steinle case, but no. These mayors, all uber liberals, believe they will harvest more votes by showing phony compassion than by promoting public safety and fighting anarchy. If the left believes everybody should be allowed to come into this country, say it! Say it! But know that sanctuary policies will never be able to tell the good from the bad. The chaos will continue to rule. So it comes down to what Donald Trump will do to the mayors and counties that defy him on immigration law. Has to do something. And we expect the showdown will develop quickly early next year. And that's the memo now for the top story tonight. Reaction. Joining us from Washington, Newt Gingrich. There is a good chance that the former Speaker of the House, come January, will be advising President Trump on everything, including the sanctuary city deal. So what will you tell him, Mr. Speaker?
Well, first of all, you have to say, Rahm Emanuel's crazy. Here's a mayor whose city is collapsing into violence. One person shot every 2 hours, setting all-time records for murders. And he wants to stop the federal government from getting criminals? I mean, remember, President-elect Trump is talking about a very focused effort to get rid of people who are criminals. Now, you would think that the mayor of Chicago, in the middle of the worst murder pattern in the city's history, would be thrilled to have somebody help him get rid of criminals. This is madness. So my advice to President-elect Trump is pretty simple. 1, you should ask your new Attorney General on day 1 to direct immigration efforts right into the sanctuary cities. 2, you should indicate any mayor who attempts to interpose, a term, by the way, used by the white segregationists 40 years ago, to interpose themselves against the federal government, would be liable to prosecution. And 3, you should ask the Congress immediately, as one of its first items, to pass legislation authorizing cutting off all federal aid. Now, let's see how long Chicagoans like the idea.
But I don't know if that's going to happen.
Of federal aid to Chicago
with the filibuster process in the Senate, we tried to get Kate's law passed, and Reid and his crew filibustered it, couldn't get up, and it was all chaos. Well, but let's take it one by one. Let's take it one by one.
Remember, there are 24 Democratic senators up in 2018.
I know that.
How would you like to go home and defend?
But it's going to take a long time.
Protecting sanctuary cities breaking federal law.
It's going to take a long time for that to happen. It's not going to happen overnight. But I want to go down the list that you just laid out for the folks. The first thing is that the mayors conflate good illegal aliens, the people who are just here to make a living, with the criminals. They don't sort them out. Okay, there's no sorting going on.
Right.
It's just like we're just not going to, if ICE calls us to detain and we have to detain someone and hold them, we're not going to do it. We don't care if the guy is a murderer that killed Kate Steinle, the alleged murderer, or some guy who just ran a stop sign. We're just not going to do it. So their responsibility is nothing. And they're doing it for votes. You know what they're doing it for. De Blasio in New York, the only reason he holds office is because minority people vote for him. That's it. So he's never going to cooperate.
Well, but I also think it's important to remember one of the reasons Trump won was a commitment to the rule of law. You know, we're not Venezuela. We're not a country where you get to randomly pick and choose. That's part of why Hillary Clinton was repudiated. And I would say to the mayors, they don't get to pick which federal law they obey.
But they
want to come to Congress and
they have been for decades. They've defied the federal government decades. Now you say if the mayors don't cooperate, they may be prosecuted. We have Is It Legal coming up behind you to see if that's true. But on the philosophy of two sovereign systems, state and federal, very hard for the federal government to prosecute.
Look, we fought a civil war to indicate that there is one sovereign system. It is the United States of America. No state, no city can interpose itself between federal law and the citizens. We've been down this in 1958. The Supreme Court ruled decisively that it's impossible. That would be chaos. It would be anarchy.
Well, there is now.
In fact, Madison himself said that.
That's what we have now.
Which is why part of the reason we're getting President-elect Trump is the country is sick and tired of it.
Well, it'd be interesting to see what he does. Okay, so we assume that you'll advise President Trump and when he takes office and that he'll do it to go to Congress and say we have to have a bill that cuts off funding to cities like San Francisco and New York City and L.A. and Chicago. These are the biggest cities in the country if they do not cooperate with Homeland Security. Now, that's going to encompass a lot of debate. You're going to have to write two versions of the bill. You're going to have to reconcile them together. You know how the system works. It's going to take a while for that to happen.
It might take a while. And in the short run, he can redirect federal resources of enforcement into precisely those cities. He can also prosecute anybody who interferes with federal enforcement. An aggressive attorney general can make a very big difference in this case if they insist on enforcing the law.
That's a key.
And then finally, but, you know, Bill, it's not bad for America to go through the process of writing a law, debating it. I think the more people get involved in this debate, the more angry they're going to be at these mayors, and the more they're going to think this is crazy.
All right. It'll be a very fascinating thing. I do believe this will be on the top of his agenda, this and a tax break. Tax cuts and all that when he gets in. Do you think I'm right on that?
No, I think you're right. And notice he's narrowed it to a really classic focus. Why wouldn't we deport criminals who are here illegally?
Right.
Rapists, murderers, drug dealers. I mean, what kind of argument is Rahm Emanuel going to make for protecting rapists, murderers, and drug dealers in the city of Chicago when he's got this many killings a year?
No, we'll
it's
see.
really goofy.
Mr. Speaker, thanks as always. We appreciate it. One footnote, Newt Gingrich is the author of the brand new book, Treason. Certainly worth a look. Good holiday gift.